I love these Flatwing deceiver style baitfish patterns. They fish well in all sorts of retrieves and presentations, and I have versions of them in my boxes for everything from striped bass to pike. No matter what piscivorous fish you're after, they're almost certain to fall for this streamer at some point. To start the Flatwing baitfish, lock in your hook and tie your thread in behind the eye. Lay a quick thread base back to where the hook starts to bend and park your bobbin there for now. Go to your white bucktail and separate out a clump that's a little less than a pencil in width when compressed together. Cut it off of the main cluster, measure the section so it's about 2 hook shanks in length, and bring it to where you stopped your thread. Lay the bucktail on top of the hook shank and rub it back and forth in your fingers just slightly so that the fibers come a little down and below the shank as well. Take tight wraps to tie the section in, ensuring the bucktail doesn't spin much from where you initially placed it down. Cut off the excess when complete. Now we're going to add 3 different hackle feathers for the rest of the tail. Start with a white feather, measured out so that the tip ends around where your white bucktail does. Once your length is established, strip off some of the fibers where the new base will be, and cut the stem there. Tie this shortened feather on top of the shank, just in front of where you added your bucktail, then grab a second white feather. Measure and cut this feather so that the section goes another hook shank or so past the first white feather and your bucktail. Tie it in on top of where the first feather was added. Our last hackle addition will be a single grizzly feather. Make this one the same length as your last and longest white feather, and tie it in the same spot. These 3 feathers will give a beautiful swimming action to the tail of your fly, even when it's just sitting in the water. The bucktail back here will keep the body of the baitfish when the wet hackle slims down. The inner body of this pattern is made up entirely of UV angel hair. To add it in, pull off a few light clumps and start twisting them around your thread to form a small noodle. Wrap this noodle up your hook shank towards the head of your fly, adding more as you go. Stop when you've reached about a half a hook eye behind the head. Angel hair has some nice wispy fibers that fill out the body a little more when they get wet, but they can get matted down during the tying process. This is entirely optional, but I like to hit the body with some quick brushes with a Velcro strip to bring these strands back out. Your baitfish will really shimmer with the addition of some crystal flash. Grab 2 long strands from your kit, align them evenly, and find their midpoints. Tie in the midpoint around where you stopped your thread, ensuring they stay on top of the hook shank. Now take the front-facing sections of the flash and fold them backwards tightly. Take some wraps again to lock all 4 now back-facing strands in place. The ends of these strands should extend a little bit past the ends of your 2 longest hackle feathers. Next, go back to your white bucktail and cut off another section that's a bit thicker than the clump we used for the tail. Measure and cut the clump so that the tips almost reach the ends of your tail section of bucktail. Invert your hook and tie in the butt ends of this section just behind the hook eye on the underside of the shank. Wrap tightly and keep the bucktail pinched so that it stays in place and doesn't splay out too much on the sides. Keep wrapping until the bucktail is secured and angles back from the hook shank like so. Now bring your hook back right side up. Take your black bucktail and snip off a section of the same width as your last white section, measured and cut in the same way as well. Lay the bucktail down on top of the hook shank behind the eye and wrap tightly again until the bucktail mirrors the angle of the white bucktail below it. At this point, you can keep wrapping until the black and white bucktail is all covered by a layer of white thread. You can also go in with your scissors and trim back any outstanding butt sections of bucktail. Don't go overboard and risk crowding the hook eye if you're getting close. Any loose ends or fibers will end up getting covered and protected by the resin head we'll add later. Go to your black flashaboo and pull out 2 strands. Lay the midpoints of these strands down on top of the shank, right on our thread base covering the butt sections of bucktail. Just like we tied in our crystal flash, pull the front-facing strands toward the tail of our baitfish and wrap again to lock down. All that's left of the tying portion of this fly is to whip finish on the head. Take 3 or 4 wraps forward on your whip finishing tool and snip the excess. Holographic eyes are a great addition to this baitfish pattern. Put a small drop of super glue on the backs of each of the eyes and secure them one at a time. They should sit centered on the hook shank exactly opposite from each other, slightly behind the hook eye. It's vital that the head of this fly is protected. Without the right coverage, the eyes can easily come off, or even worse, the thread base up here can unravel, disintegrating most of your streamer. Luckily, all that's needed to prevent this is a bit of UV resin. You want the resin to start behind the holographic eyes and taper down to the very front of the hook. I like to apply a couple of layers of resin to achieve this. Doing it this way allows you to work with smaller quantities of the stuff at a time and ensures you can set it exactly where you want it. You can always add more resin, but you can't take any off, so use it sparingly until you have a head shaped exactly as you want. UV resin also adds a bit of weight to the head, giving the streamer a nice bucking action when stripped. With the head complete, your baitfish is ready to go. The fly may appear a little brushy and thick fresh off the vise at first. If you've never used a flatwing deceiver pattern before, I highly recommend running your fly under the sink for a few seconds to get an idea of how it looks wet. As seen here, in the water the fly slims down significantly. The bucktail up front keeps the baitfish's body shape, and the back end tapers to a sleek tail that has some great movement subsurface. For how good it looks when stripped, one of my favorite ways to fish this pattern is a slow retrieve with a lot of long pauses to let the materials do their work. Thanks for watching, and happy tying.